Since the Trump administration began its immigration crackdown, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, has detained hundreds of individuals across upstate New York, including here in the North Country. ICE agents have conducted targeted searches for undocumented residents on North Country farms, at local businesses, even in private homes. Advocates for these vulnerable people are trying to figure out how to respond. In Lake Placid, a group is setting up a safe space in a church that they hope ICE wouldn't be able to get to. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from the Wild Center in Tupper Lake, dedicated to strengthening visitors' connections to the natural world. More at wildcenter.org.
Hey, I'm David Summerstein. It's Monday, June 30th. First up, Governor Kathy Hochul was in Saranac Lake on Friday to highlight the potential impacts of President Donald Trump's budget cuts. His so-called Big Beautiful Bill would slash funding for Medicaid, food assistance, and other programs that many in the North Country rely on. The Senate may have voted on that bill by the time you hear this. Emily Russell has our story.
Hundreds of people packed inside the Harrietstown Town Hall on Friday afternoon. An MC introduced about a dozen of the area's movers and shakers, from leaders of local nonprofits to business CEOs and top political donors.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, please stand and welcome the 57th governor of the great state of New York, Governor Kathy Hochul.
Hochul stood at the podium between two big poster boards. One highlighted the impacts of Canadian tariffs on the region. The other listed potential impacts of Trump's proposed budget cuts. The North Country voted heavily in favor of Trump. This is a pretty solidly red district. But Saranac Lake leans left. Among a more sympathetic crowd on Friday, the Democratic governor struck a serious tone.
Because right now, because of decisions being made in Washington as we speak, that this area is under siege.
Just minutes before Friday's event in Saranac Lake, news broke that Trump had suspended all trade talks with Canada. That's after Canada introduced a retaliatory tax on U.S. tech companies. The trade war began this spring after Trump imposed steep tariffs on Canadian goods and suggested the country become the 51st state. The president's policies and rhetoric have had a ripple effect throughout the North Country. Border crossings from Canada are down by 20 to 30%. Hochul said Friday that businesses are feeling the pain.
The Malone Golf Club alone, they said they've lost $400,000 in Canadian tourism dollars that they used to count on. I don't know how you pay the bills. I don't know how you pay your staff, how you keep the lights on.
Another focus of Friday's event was Trump's immigration policies. He's pushed for ICE agents to arrest 3,000 people per day. Some of those arrests are happening here on North Country farms. Michael Murphy, manager of Child Stock Farms in Franklin County, spoke at Friday's event about the impact of Trump's immigration tactics.
One day, mass deportations are promised. The next day, there's a talk of exemptions for farm workers. And then it's back to raids and removals. This uncertainty creates fear and instability in the workforce we all depend on. Immigrant workers are the backbone of New York's agricultural economy.
After a handful of speakers highlighted the impacts of possible funding cuts, Governor Hochul returned to the front of the room. She called on the crowd to push back on the president's proposed budget cuts and urged them to reach out to Stefanik.
You have an influential member of Congress who can do the right thing tomorrow, right? We can listen, I'm going to give everybody, I have hope.
Friday's event came the same day that The Hill, a national newspaper, cited two sources who said Stefanik is preparing to officially announce her run for governor. I asked Hochul about this after Friday's event.
Any Republican who runs, we don't know who that's going to be, will have to do a lot of explaining on why they were the enablers. They were the enablers to Donald Trump's policies when they had the power to stop it.
Trump made real gains in New York in last year's election, getting 44% of the vote compared to 36% in his first election. It was a far closer race for Hochul, who beat her Republican challenger by just 6%. The latest polling shows that Stefanik or another Republican could close that gap even more. Emily Russell, North Country Public Radio, Saranac Lake.
Again, the Senate was pushing to vote on the so-called Big Beautiful Bill Act today. It may have passed or failed by the time you hear this. Check out NPR and All Things Considered for the details. President Trump's immigration crackdown has already reached into the North Country, in Glens Falls, Sackett's Harbor, Potsdam, Tupper Lake. As David Escobar reports, a new group in Lake Placid is taking a proactive step to educate immigrants without legal papers about their rights and provide them with a sanctuary space.
Keela Grimmett had heard stories about increased immigration enforcement in the North Country, but it became personal this past winter when she picked up her daughter from school on a Friday afternoon.
Teachers were crying, kids were holding cupcakes, and I quickly realized something was going on.
A decision from Homeland Security had revoked temporary protected status for a Venezuelan family at the school. That means they'd either have to leave the U.S. or be forcibly removed by immigration officials.
And sure enough, there was a mama and a little kindergartner who were having to leave that weekend.
Grimmett says the family planned to leave immediately. An ice storm delayed their plane over the weekend, and the following Monday, a federal judge reinstated their legal status, allowing them to remain in the country. Grimmett says their story opened her eyes to just how precarious legal status is for many of her neighbors.
That really keyed me in on there are people within our local community who are being impacted by this.
She's now a co-founder of Lake Placid Immigrant Allies, a new group focused on supporting immigrants living and working in the village. One of their efforts is to create a designated sanctuary space at St. Eustace Episcopal Church. Sanctuary spaces mostly exist in places like churches and community centers. That's because owners of these buildings can deem areas within them as private to give people a place to shelter in the event of an ice raid. St. Eustace Rector Ken Hitch says designating the space as a sanctuary church comes with a sense of safety for immigrants.
In part, it has the same effect of seeing a flag or a bumper sticker or a sign that says that you are welcome here. It has a practical side in being able to provide sanctuary space and private space when immigration enforcement is in the area and in the building.
Some parishioners at St. Eustace worry ICE activity is already making people afraid to leave their homes. Under federal law, ICE can enter any public space, including restaurants, supermarkets, and building lobbies. So Hitch says they believe new private areas signs inside St. Eustace would require ICE agents to provide a warrant to search.
But that's not enough. Also having a plan for staff, for members of the congregation, members of the community using the space, as far as if immigration enforcement should show up, how do we go about implementing that plan and protecting those immigrants that are here in the building and in the community.
Hitch is also a member of Lake Placid Immigrant Allies. The group recently held a Know Your Rights workshop at St. Eustace to help locals understand what to do if they encounter ICE. One concern is that the hundreds of international students who come to Lake Placid each summer on temporary J-1 work visas might not understand their rights if approached by an ICE agent.
The vast majority of those in the service industry are immigrant workers, and those coming to visit. There's a lot of tourism, as we know, in Lake Placid and in the region, and international athletes coming here to compete.
Lake Placid Mayor Art Devlin says foreign-born workers are the backbone of the village's summer economy.
The internationals that come and work in Lake Placid under the J-1 program have been an important part of our community. I want to say going back to about the mid-90s, and they've been coming year after year. We couldn't do it without them, and we're very glad that they're here.
In most cases, local police don't assist federal immigration agents. Lake Placid Police Chief Chuck Dobson says his department doesn't check immigration status and isn't required to work with ICE.
What ICE is doing in and around the community is, within their own jurisdiction. They work within federal jurisdiction. So at least in my experience, it's pretty rare that they would reach out to us anyway. I know they've, been in the community when we weren't even aware of it.
Keela Grimmett says that moment at her daughter's school made it clear. Immigration enforcement wasn't just something happening elsewhere. It was here, in her own community.
There are certain things outside of our control, but what is within our control is what we're going to do when that happens, right? Are we going to show up? Are we going to put our physical bodies in the space to show ICE or other law enforcement officials that what they're doing is not okay, that we want to protect our local immigrant population?
Grimmett says resisting fear starts with readiness and with neighbors willing to step up and speak out. David Escobar, North Country Public Radio in Lake Placid.
We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Michael Farley and Caretaker, both in Canton. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.